In the opening years of the 20th century, the Appalachian Mountains in eastern Kentucky were a world apart. Rolling ridges, thick forests, and narrow valleys created a natural barrier that both protected and imprisoned those who lived within them. Breathitt County, often called Bloody Breathitt because of its long history of feuds and clan violence, was one of the most isolated areas of the region. Coal mining had begun creeping in by the 1910s, but many families remained untouched by industrial progress, surviving instead on subsistence farming, timber cutting, and barter. Roads were scarce, doctors few, and schools distant. What happened inside a family's hollow often stayed there, unchallenged by outside authorities. This isolation bred both independence and secrecy. In court records preserved at the Jackson's courthouse, the county seat, one finds repeated property disputes and inheritance petitions filed by the same surnames, Strong, Miller, and Turner. These families were often related by marriage, sometimes by blood, and rarely sought alliances outside their own community. An 1898 land claim involving John Turner lists 3 witnesses, all of them Turners as well, underscoring how tightly the family defended its boundaries. By the 1920s, whispers began circulating about one particular household. According to oral histories collected during the Federal Writers' Project in the 1930s, residents spoke of a hidden bloodline in the hills, a family that kept its daughters guarded and resisted any match beyond kin. "They don't let their girls out," one Breathitt resident told interviewer Francis Donovan in 1937. "It's all in the family, if you know what I mean." Local newspapers occasionally hinted at the consequences. The Lexington Herald in 1923 reported on a mountain child born with grievous deformities in Breathitt County, though the surname was withheld. Locals, however, believed they knew which family the article described. This atmosphere of secrecy, combined with the absence of outside oversight, created conditions where disturbing practices could continue unchecked. Behind the closed doors of one Turner homestead, a young woman's life was already being mapped out, not according to her choice, but by the rigid will of her family. She would become known in whispers as the bride who never escaped, a living symbol of the destructive cycle of inbreeding that Appalachia's isolation had allowed to flourish. The Turner family name was deeply embedded in Breathitt County long before Mary Turner was born. Census schedules from 1880, 1900, and 1910 show clusters of Turners living within just a few miles of each other, scattered along the tributaries of the North Fork Kentucky River. In the small farming communities near Quicksand Creek and Lost Creek, nearly every household carried a familiar name: Turner, Miller, or Strong. These families rarely intermarried with outsiders, a fact that genealogists later described as a closed loop of kinship. At the center of this network stood Elijah Turner, born in 1865. He emerged after the Civil War as a stern patriarch, one who demanded obedience and prided himself on land ownership. Court records from Jackson in 1892 list Elijah as the complainant in a property dispute against his own brother, showing how even within the family, boundaries were contested. Elijah married Martha Miller, his first cousin, reinforcing the cycle of close kin unions. Together, they had several children, including Mary, who would later bear the brunt of the family's secrecy. Evidence of incest and inbreeding was whispered about, but rarely spoken openly. Birth registers from the Kentucky Department of Vital statistics reveal children born into the Turner household without a paternal name listed, suggesting deliberate concealment. Midwives who worked in the hills testified decades later, through interviews preserved by the WPA, that some Turner babies were delivered with cleft palates, twisted limbs, or profound developmental delays. One midwife, Sarah Combs, recalled, in a 1936 interview, "Them Turners had babes that weren't right. Folks said it was God's punishment for keeping blood too close." The 1915 Breathitt County School Report further hinted at the secrecy. Turner children were often absent from attendance rolls, excused by claims of sickness or farm work. Teachers noted unusual behaviors and physical differences, but these comments never went beyond the classroom. As the years passed, Elijah's grip on the household deepened. He raised his children with the belief that loyalty to kin outweighed all else, and that outside influence threatened the family's survival. This ideology laid the groundwork for what was to come. When Mary reached her teenage years, her future had already been decided, not by her will, but by Elijah's unbending command. Mary Turner was born in 1903, the second daughter of Elijah Turner and his cousin wife, Martha Miller. Her childhood, like most in rural Breathitt County, was shaped by chores, the Bible, and the rhythms of the land. But unlike some of her peers, Mary's world was tightly controlled. Neighbors later recalled that she was rarely seen beyond the family's immediate property, and when she did appear, it was usually under the watchful eye of her father or elder brothers. According to genealogical records examined by researchers in the 1970s, Elijah considered Mary to be pure stock, a phrase that reveals the disturbing mindset within the family. In his eyes, she represented a way to preserve land, name, and bloodline. By the time Mary was 16, her fate was sealed. Court documents from 1919 showed Thomas Turner, her older cousin, then 35 years old, filing as guardian over Mary's small inheritance from her deceased uncle. Within months of that filing, Mary became his wife. No church records exist to confirm a ceremony, suggesting the union was conducted privately, likely inside the Turner homestead, away from public scrutiny. Neighbors whispered uneasily about what had occurred. Oral testimonies collected decades. Later by folklorist Leonard Roberts include one telling quote from a Breathitt resident, "She was made a bride before she was ever a woman. They didn't let her out, and they sure didn't let her choose." For the community, the marriage reinforced old suspicions that the Turners had no intention of allowing their daughters to marry outside their own blood. Mary's life changed drastically after her forced marriage. She became a possession rather than a partner, her movements restricted, her voice silenced. By early 1920, she was pregnant with her first child. That same year, Breathitt County's birth registry lists a male infant born to Mary Turner and Thomas Turner, stillborn, with a midwife's note describing the child as distorted. The tragedy was quietly concealed, but it marked the beginning of a grim pattern. Mary's body, barely grown, would endure pregnancy after pregnancy, each carrying the weight of her family's disturbing truth. Within the confines of the Turner home, she became both a victim and a symbol of the bloodline her family sought to protect at all costs. Mary Turner's first pregnancy ended in tragedy, but it was only the beginning. Between 1920 and 1930, she gave birth to at least 6 more children. The county's fragile records tell part of the story. Birth certificates filed in Jackson list, some children under Thomas Turner's name, but several lack any paternal information, a detail that matches earlier Turner family patterns. 2 of the infants died within days of delivery. Their deaths were recorded as failure to thrive, a term often used at the time when the cause was either unknown or deliberately left vague. The children who survived bore the physical and developmental scars of their lineage. A county health report from 1932 notes that 2 Turner children were unable to speak in full sentences and displayed abnormal cranial structure. Teachers at the one-room schoolhouse on Quicksand Creek, interviewed decades later, remembered the children as silent watchers, sitting apart from their peers, often staring but rarely speaking. One teacher, Clara Holland, recalled, "They didn't play like other young'uns. They seemed lost, like they was half here and half somewhere else." Locals whispered about the disturbing truth behind these afflictions. While few dared to name the word incest openly, many suspected it. An entry in the Jackson Times from 1928, describing a mountain family of unusual misfortunes, was widely believed to refer to the Turners. The article avoided names but painted an image of children hidden away from sight, their deformities too severe for public exposure. By the early 1930s, Mary's surviving children were rarely seen outside the home. Neighbors described the family property as unnervingly quiet, with curtains drawn even in daylight. A midwife who delivered one of Mary's later infants confided, in testimony collected in 1941, that the babe's face weren't right, the eyes too far apart, and it made no sound. Such accounts reveal the hidden bloodline's cost, a cycle of births marked by deformities, silence, and suffering. Mary, still in her 20s, had grown frail from repeated pregnancies and constant isolation. While Thomas Turner carried himself as the unquestioned master of the household, Mary's body and her children bore the visible evidence of a disturbing inheritance, an inheritance the family worked tirelessly to conceal. The secrecy of the Turner household could not last forever. In 1933, Kentucky launched a public health initiative to survey remote families for tuberculosis, a disease that ravaged rural communities. County Inspector William H. Fugate recorded his attempts to visit households along Lost Creek. In his notes, still preserved in Frankfort's state archives, he marked the Turner home with a single line: refused entry, male guardian armed. That male guardian was Thomas Turner, who reportedly threatened Fugate with a shotgun and ordered him off the property. This refusal raised alarms. In Jackson's courthouse, officials debated whether the Turners were hiding a contagious illness or something more sinister. Yet local law enforcement, long wary of challenging entrenched families, hesitated to intervene. In small communities like Breathitt, blood ties often crossed into positions of authority, making outside interference unlikely. Still, rumors spread. By 1935, whispers of the Inbred family reached beyond the county. The Lexington Herald leader briefly ran an article hinting at incestuous practices in the Eastern Hills, though the piece was pulled after just 2 days, reportedly under pressure from Breathitt officials. Surviving clippings at the University of Kentucky's library confirm its existence. The Turners publicly denied any wrongdoing, dismissing accusations as outsider lies. Yet neighbors saw a different story. Oral accounts gathered in the 1970s describe Mary appearing gaunt, with bruises on her arms and a hollow look in her eyes. She wasn't allowed to speak, one neighbor recalled. If Thomas was near, she kept her head down. Court records from 1936 brought the Turner name back into the open. Distant relatives filed a land division petition against Thomas, accusing him of hoarding inheritance that should have been shared. During testimony, contradictions emerged. One cousin hinted that Thomas kept his own blood close, a veiled reference many understood but none dared to challenge openly. Despite mounting suspicion, no protective measures were taken for Mary or her surviving children. The county, content to leave the matter buried in secrecy, allowed the disturbing truth to fester. But the cracks in the Turner family's wall of denial were widening, and soon tragedy would make silence impossible. By the late 1930s, the Turner family was unraveling. Vital records from the Kentucky Department of Health show a troubling pattern. Between 1937 and 1940, 3 Turner children died in quick succession. Causes of death were listed as failure to thrive, unknown fever, and congenital malformation. These vague medical entries reflected the limits of rural health care, but to those who knew the family, they were further proof of the hereditary toll exacted by incest. Neighbors began noticing violent disturbances at the Turner property. Oral testimonies collected decades later describe hearing shouting matches that ended with sudden, eerie silence. One man, James Noble, recalled, "You'd hear him, Thomas raging, cursing, sometimes things breaking. Then nothing, like the house swallowed it all." Rumors spread that Mary endured regular beatings, her frail figure a living testament to years of control and abuse. In 1939, Thomas Turner's temper erupted publicly. Arrest logs from the Breathitt County Jail show that he was detained for assault following a drunken fight in Jackson. Though released after paying a fine, the incident exposed his volatility to a wider audience. Around the same time, county welfare officers attempted to investigate reports of child neglect at the Turner household. Their official notes, preserved in Frankfort archives, read, "Access denied, guardian hostile." The refusal only deepened. Suspicion, but again, no further action followed. The 1940 federal census provides another striking clue. While the Turner family was listed, multiple household entries were left blank. This unusual omission suggested either intentional concealment or outright refusal to provide information. For a census designed to account for every American household, the gaps stand as silent evidence of what the Turners were hiding. By now, Mary had entered her mid-30s. Years of repeated childbirth, poor nutrition, and unrelenting control had worn her down. Neighbors described her as a ghost walking, thin, pale, and seen only fleetingly. Her children, rarely glimpsed, were said to bear unmistakable deformities. The once impenetrable wall of secrecy was crumbling under the weight of illness, violence, and death. All it would take was one catastrophic event to expose the disturbing truth that had haunted Breathitt County for decades. In the summer of 1942, disaster struck the Turner household. A fire swept through the family's wooden homestead on Lost Creek. Newspaper reports in the Jackson Times dated July 17, 1942, mention a tragic blaze claiming the life of a mountain child. The coroner's inquest, preserved in Breathitt County court files, described the victim as a male child of severe physical malformation. The details, though clinical, revealed what neighbors had long suspected. The Turner bloodline bore the unmistakable scars of inbreeding. The fire forced authorities to confront what had remained hidden for decades. County officials entered the property, finding conditions of extreme neglect. Oral testimony collected later by journalist Harry Cordell included accounts from a deputy who described children who did not speak, whose eyes seemed vacant, and a woman, Mary, too weak to stand. For the first time, the hidden bloodline was documented in official records rather than whispers. The case briefly captured wider attention. The Louisville Courier-Journal ran a short article referencing incest and secrecy in the hills of Breathitt. Yet with World War II dominating national headlines, the story was soon overshadowed. Local officials, perhaps eager to avoid scandal, allowed the family to fade into obscurity rather than pursue criminal charges. By the late 1940s, the Turner property was abandoned. Surviving members dispersed into neighboring counties, some adopting new surnames to escape the family stigma. Mary Turner herself vanished quietly from records. Genealogists believe she died around 1951, likely buried in an unmarked grave on family land. Her life, shaped by control and silence, ended without recognition or justice. For Breathitt County, the story became an unspoken legend, a reminder of how isolation and secrecy could create tragedies hidden in plain sight. The bride who never escaped was not merely a victim of her family, but of a system that refused to intervene. Court petitions, censuses with blank lines, and fragile testimonies remain the only evidence of her existence. Her story echoes as America's forgotten incest tragedy, a tale of a hidden bloodline, of children born into silence and deformity, and of a woman whose life was consumed by a disturbing truth the community chose to ignore.